Look at these two photographs of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Look closely at them. Are these images the same image or just really similar? Can you spot the difference between them? Really compare them. Do you see it yet? Yes, I bet you've got it. This one here on the right is leaning a little bit more than the one on the left. Just a tad, barely noticeable. But once you see that the one on the right is leaning a bit more, it looks so obvious to you. You can't unsee it now. But what if I told you,
They're the same picture.
here, let me prove it to you. Here are the two pictures again. It's plainly obvious that the one on the right is leaning more, especially when you compare the bottoms of the photos. These are obviously not the same photo, right? Well, let's just swap them and see. Um, that's weird. It still looks like the one on the right is leaning more. Weird. Let's look at this image. We have a gray rectangle with a smaller gray rectangle inside it. But it looks like they both have gradients going in opposite directions. The bigger rectangle is light gray, almost white on the left side, and as we move to the right side, it gets darker. But the rectangle inside is the opposite. It's dark gray on the left side, and as we move over to the right, it becomes lighter. What's so interesting about this? It seems pretty straightforward to me. I bet you're ahead of me now. If I take away the bigger rectangle, it's easy to see that the smaller rectangle is one solid shade of gray throughout. It doesn't have a gradient to it. But when it's surrounded by an image which does change shade, our brains reinterpret the image and see the smaller rectangle as having a gradient to it as well. And even though you know it's a trick, your eyes are still tricked. Your brain perhaps is able to override the information and know it's a visual illusion, but your eyes still see the illusion. This one is an audio trick. See if you can get yourself to hear both words. This is another famous illusion. The squares labeled A and B are the exact same color. Here, I can prove it to you by connecting them. This rectangle is one solid color, and when we hold it close to each square, we see they're both the same color. I can even get rid of the board so you can see the rectangle is one solid shade of gray. And when I bring the board back, you see A and B are the same shade of gray. But if I remove this connection, your mind reads them as completely different. The human mind is constantly fooled by little things like this. We're all very suggestible, and who we are, how we behave, depends deeply on the situation we find ourselves in. Perhaps these errors in cognition, which cannot be unseen even when we know the truth, extend also to economic decisions. Perhaps the context we are given can influence how we interpret things and change what we will ultimately do. I say that like it's a question, but it isn't. We are all, and I mean you too, very susceptible to these influences. Here is an example of how context affects our decision making. I'm going to give you two scenarios, and you tell me what you would do. Scenario 1. Assume you have been exposed to a disease which, if contracted, leads to a quick and painless death within a week. The probability you have the disease is 0.001. So pretty small, very small really. What is the maximum you would be willing to pay for a cure? What do you think? Think of a number right now about how much you would be willing to pay for that cure. I can tell you that in a large survey, the average answer was $200. So a fair amount, not a huge amount, to avoid that small risk of death. Okay, scenario 2. Suppose volunteers are needed for research on this disease. All that would be required is that you expose yourself to a 0.001 chance of contracting the disease. What is the minimum you would require to volunteer for this program? What's your answer? Is it the same as in scenario 1? I'm betting not. I'm betting you would demand a lot more to participate in this program, which could be deadly. The average answer for this one was $10,000. If your answer was different for each scenario, there's an inconsistency in your decision making, and what you're willing to pay for something will depend on the context you're put in. If your answers to these are different, then you just got manipulated into giving different answers to the same question. The question is, what is it worth to you to reduce your risk of death by 0.001? Let's do another one. Imagine that the US is preparing for the outbreak of an unusual disease, which is expected to kill 600 people. You're the President of the United States, and we're looking to you to make a decision. Due to limited resources, we have to choose between two plans. Option A. This plan will save the lives of 200 people. Option B. There's a 1/3 chance this plan saves all 600 lives, but a 2/3 chance that it doesn't save anyone. Which would you go for? Pick one now and remember it. As you're deliberating which plan to choose, your advisors burst in and say, they got their numbers wrong. Here are the revised estimates. If we go with option A, what will really happen is 400 people will die. However, with option B, the advisors now believe there's a 1/3 chance that 0 people will die and a 2/3 chance that 600 people will die. It's time to make your choice. What'll it be? Option A or option B? When given the options this way, a large majority of respondents say that option A is the best. It's better to take the sure thing than to go for a gamble which could result in no one being saved. People are risk averse here, meaning they don't want to take a risk if they don't have to. And notice that the expected value of lives saved is the same in both plans. However, when the outcome of the plan is presented as a loss instead of a gain, the preference flips. A majority of people prefer option B here. When we talked about it in terms of lives saved, the outcome was framed as a gain, and people were risk averse. When we talk about it in terms of lives lost, however, the outcome is framed as a loss, and now people are risk seeking. They're willing to throw the dice for that chance at losing nothing. How the outcome is framed changes what people tend to choose. The framing effect is when individuals are presented with the same set of choices, but the choices are framed in a different manner, and this leads to different outcomes. We like to say that some people see the glass half empty while others see it as half full. But the truth is, sometimes you will see it as half empty, and sometimes you will see it as half full. And which mood you're in isn't entirely in your control. It is determined at least in part by the environment you find yourself in. This has some profound effects on our understanding of economic behavior, just as it has some profound effects on how you might come to understand yourself.